The stranger's visit. Sara led a peaceful life in her small town. The routine was predictable, and she found comfort in the slow pace of everyday life. One late afternoon, as she tended to her yard, she noticed something unusual on the deserted road in front of her house. A man was approaching slowly, dressed in a black overcoat that seemed out of place in the warmth of the setting sun. As he crossed through the gate, Sara felt an inexplicable chill. The stranger's face was pale, with deep-set eyes, and he walked with deliberate steps, as if every movement had purpose. She tried to dismiss the discomfort, but something about him suggested that he was no ordinary visitor. "Good afternoon," the man said, his voice low and rough, echoing slightly despite the stillness around them. "Sorry to intrude, but I seem to be lost." Sara nodded, trying to shake off the strange feeling. "Of course, can I help?" The man offered a slight smile, though his gaze held something unsettling. "You're very kind, Sara," he said, and the familiar way he spoke made her shiver. "How do you know my name?" she asked, taking a step back. "Oh, I know more than that," he replied, tilting his head slightly. "In fact, I know a great deal about you." Sara felt her heartbeat quicken. She was sure she'd never seen this man before, but something in his eyes made it seem like he knew every secret she held. "What do you want?" she whispered, instinctively wanting to run, but rooted in place. The man stayed silent for a moment, observing her with a cold smile. "All in good time, Sara," he finally said, his tone a mix of promise and threat. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Sara standing frozen, trembling under the weight of the mystery he had brought with him. That night, she couldn't shake the stranger's image from her mind. His rough voice, the way he had said her name, it all felt like a silent threat. She wondered how he knew so much about her and why his visit had left a lingering sense of dread. As she tried to sleep, something stirred her awake. A faint sound came from outside, like footsteps circling her house. Sara got up, her heart racing, and peeked through a gap in the curtain. In the dim moonlight, she saw the stranger standing in the middle of her yard, looking directly at the house. His presence was even more sinister under the pale glow. He stared with such intensity that she felt he could see her, watching him back from the shadows. Sara felt an urge to confront him, but fear held her back. Instead, she quietly retreated from the window, holding her breath. After a few minutes of silence, she gathered the courage to look again, but this time, the yard was empty. The stranger had vanished. The next morning, she tried to act as though nothing had happened, but the image of him standing there haunted her. She confided in a close friend, hoping to find some relief, but her friend merely laughed, suggesting he might just be a lost traveler. Yet Sara knew there was something much deeper and darker about the visit. She was certain that he was no ordinary visitor, and that somehow he was far from finished with her. In the following days, Sara lived in a constant sense of unease. No matter where she went, she felt the stranger's shadow lingering nearby. Every time she turned a corner or stepped into her yard, it felt like someone was watching. Nights were even worse, filled with faint noises echoing through the house, waking her with a start. She wondered if she was imagining it, but the fear was real. One night, she found a note on her door. The letters were firm, written with precise strokes. "Don't ignore my visit, Sara. There are things we need to discuss." The dread settled deep inside her, but curiosity compelled her to read the note over and over. What kind of message was this? Who was this man, and what did he want? Determined to confront her fears, Sara decided she wouldn't run anymore. She still remembered his cold gaze, but she needed answers. That night, she waited in her darkened living room, clutching a small knife in case of emergency. Hours passed until she finally heard slow footsteps approaching her door. The doorknob turned slowly, and Sara held her breath, feeling her heart pound. The stranger stepped inside, his expression calm, almost as if he were a welcomed guest. "I knew you would come," Sara said, trying to sound firm despite the fear that tightened her throat. He watched her, his eyes seeming to scrutinize every detail. "Of course you knew," he replied. "You feel it, don't you? Something from your past, something you don't understand. It brought me here." Confused, Sara struggled to grasp his meaning. But before she could respond, he continued, "You have something that belongs to me, Sara. Something that needs to be returned." She looked at him, bewildered. not understanding what he was referring to. But for some reason, his words resonated somewhere deep in her mind, like a distant memory. The stranger smiled slightly, a cold smile that made her fear turn into absolute terror. She realized his visit was far from over. The silence in the room made everything feel smaller. Sara felt the weight of the stranger's gaze as if he could see through her, reaching into her deepest secrets. His words echoed in her mind. "You have something that belongs to me." I don't know what you're talking about," she managed to reply, trying to sound convincing, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. The man took a step closer and slowly pulled an old small key from his coat pocket. He held it out, examining it with an almost curious expression. "You don't know?" he asked. "Or don't you want to remember?" Suddenly, fragments of memory flashed through Sara's mind. Faint images of her childhood, exploring her grandparents' old attic. She remembered finding a locked chest and, driven by a child's curiosity, hiding a key in a secret place. Yet the memory seemed so distant, it was hard to believe it was connected to what was happening now. "That key," she murmured, comprehension dawning alongside her fear. The stranger's smile grew colder. "Yes, Sara, that key unlocked something that should never have been opened." Breathless, Sara took a step back. "But I was just a child. I didn't know what I was doing." "It doesn't matter," he replied, his voice low and menacing. "What was released that day brought me back, and now the debt must be paid." Sara's terror was complete. She knew now that she couldn't escape him. He didn't want the key, he wanted something much more valuable. The man took another step toward her, and Sara felt trapped, caught between fear and a dark memory she barely understood. He extended his hand, his fingers cold as ice as they brushed against her skin. "The time has come, Sara," he murmured. "We must settle this." Sara felt the stranger's touch like a current of ice. Panic rooted her in place, but in a desperate impulse, she broke free from his grip and backed away. He watched her calmly, as if expecting her reaction. "What do you want from me?" she yelled, her voice trembling. "I want what was taken from me," he replied, his eyes darkening as he moved slowly, backing her against the wall. "When you opened the chest, you released something that should have remained dormant. Part of me was trapped there for years, and now I need an exchange to finally be free." Sara understood at last. The stranger wasn't just a visitor. He was an entity bound to the chest, something she had unknowingly released during childhood, and now he sought a price to return to the world of the living. Desperate, she searched her mind for any way to end this nightmare. She recalled old stories her grandmother had told her about how ancient objects, especially those holding secrets, sometimes bore guardians that demanded an exchange to return to their rest. "You won't take anything from me," she said, trying to sound strong. He only smiled as if accustomed to such defiance. "You have no choice, Sara. You belong to me now. The bond was sealed when you were a child, and you opened that door." Letting go of her fear, Sara made a desperate decision. She ran to the basement, where she knew an old family amulet was kept, an object her grandmother had once said could protect against lost entities. Grasping the amulet tightly, she turned to face the man. "This ends now," she shouted, raising the amulet. The stranger laughed, but his expression quickly shifted to one of anger and fear. The amulet glowed faintly, and Sara felt a powerful energy fill the room. With a furious cry, the man stepped back, his figure slowly dissolving. "This isn't over, Sara," he whispered, his voice fading. "You opened the door, and there are others like me who will come." In a final flash, he vanished completely, leaving only the echo of his voice in the darkness. Sara dropped to her knees, exhausted but finally free of his presence. The amulet, now dull, lay cold in her hand. She knew the threat was gone, but also that the encounter had left a deep mark on her. In the days that followed, Sara tried to resume her life, but every night, memories of the stranger's visit lingered in her mind, bringing back the warning he had left behind. "There are others like me who will come." Though her home now felt calm and free of his presence, Sara was haunted by the idea that the darkness she'd accidentally released as a child was far from over. She'd found peace for now, but an unease lingered, an echo of the unsettling encounter that seemed to whisper to her in the silence. Determined to protect herself and those she cared about, Sara decided to dig deeper into her family's history, searching for clues about the chest she had unlocked so long ago and any other artifacts tied to it. She knew she could no longer ignore the past that had returned to claim a price from her. This time, she would be ready. With a final look at the now empty space where the stranger had once stood, Sara took the amulet, now kept close to her at all times, and made herself a promise. She would never again underestimate the power that lay hidden in shadows.